Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A content. This is season 12, episode 16. It's content because it's not a video, it's not a podcast, but it is both of those things, but it is more than both of those things. It is greater than the sum of its parts. It is two dudes sitting in a room talking for approximately half an hour and then uploading it to a couple places entirely unedited. And you're listening to it right now.
Welcome.
Yeah, we're really glad you could join us. And by really glad, I mean we have no real sort of awareness of you unless you leave a comment. You're sort of like, you're like an aggregate number. And even if there's like 100 of you, we go, wow, normally there's more than that. But if you leave a comment, we're glad you've joined us. And then you sort of become like a real person to us instead of like a metric on an analytics screen.
It's interesting you're doing this kind of intro because one of the questions is sort of that it hits in that general area. And we can talk about it in a minute.
Yeah, so this is season 12.
Yeah.
Season 12 is our season of teams that we like, guys we think are cool.
And that are cool together.
Yeah.
So this is our second Arkham team. And our first Arkham team was Arkham Knight Batgirl because she really should be on every Arkham team. Arkham Knight Catwoman, and we had Hawkgirl. We've swapped out Hawkgirl. We've given up the ability to have more control of when we can tag out team members, and we've done that in exchange for increased Arkham synergy. And so because of that increased synergy, you might notice a couple of kind of interesting things that we're doing here with this team. Nobody's Astro Harness. Astro Harness, great defensive gear to protect against supers, especially when you have control over tag in and tag outs, because then you can bring in your Astro Harness person and control when their first invulnerability hits, so that you are ready for somebody who's maybe going to give you a little bit of trouble. Mm-hmm. We don't have Arkham Astro Harness, and we can get away with it because Arkham Knight Batgirl's passive of rescuing works as well as Astro Harness in eating damage, and she does it twice. With the second teammate that gets saved by Arkham Knight Batgirl, it gives us enough sort of defensive strength to dump empty one of the gear slots that would have been Astro Harness and use something else. Mm-hmm. Second thing is no one has Claw of Horus. So yes, Claw of Horus is great against both Astro Harness and also against opponents who are geared to take no damage. But we don't need it nearly as much and we're willing to give up its ability to shatter gears because Catwoman's monster bleed damage over time is great against opponents who can avoid direct damage. Mm-hmm. And it also works maybe a little bit less effectively, but it still works against Astro Harness because the health bleeds out so quickly in between invulnerabilities that you just need someone to kill time to let them bleed out. Mm-hmm. And we've sort of leaned into that with, what is it? Quantum. Oh God, I can't even remember now. I'm brain farting. Anyways, so we're increasing the amount of damage she does on her special. We're increasing the amount of damage over time that she does, and we're re-triggering the damage over time, and that is enough. So again, we open up another slot because Claw of Horse is great when you need to shatter gear, but if you don't need to, that 10% reducing their health when you tag in, it doesn't really move the needle for me. I'm happy so that on the teams that don't have Astro Harness, our damage output is so much higher, and it gives us a bit more flexibility on team. Mm-hmm. And so the third interesting thing on this team is that Arkham Killer Croc is a spectacular tank. So we're getting back to the old idea of how we set up our teams to have a tank. We've gotten away from that by just going sort of all offense. Mm-hmm. But you can see it a few times in these fights where even though he isn't geared as a tank, he works really well as one because of his passive. So Catwoman's specials give him armor, his own specials give him armor, and after he gets saved by Batgirl, he can build up enough armor so that he can be almost like a brand new person. Mm-hmm. So when you watch, and this is sort of a not entirely related point, but when you watch Arkham Knight Batgirl in action and saving her teammate, remember that Elseworld Flash used to be, well, his passive was sort of the same mechanism. And he used to be really great. His passive could interrupt an opponent's multi-hit special and trigger bullet time, effectively saving L12 Flash. Like, he saved himself instead of relying on Arkham Knight back roll to save him, or a teammate to save him, he was saving himself. So one of the worst decisions ever was to nerf him. He wasn't that powerful to begin with.
Yeah, because what it let you do is have his passive trigger every time instead of, or not even every time, I guess, but most times, right?
Yeah.
Instead of sort of it being super situational.
Yeah.
Because, like, it needing to finish the special means that a lot of the time, by the time the special's over, you're dead, right?
Yep.
You wouldn't even get to block a whole special for it, and it would give you a little bit of time to deal some extra damage.
Yep.
And so we went from it being something fun and interesting that wasn't incredible, but was, it felt nice, right? To something that feels significantly worse to play with.
Quake Engine. It was a Q gear. I couldn't remember what it was. And when I had the wrong Q word,
when you said quantum, I was trying to figure out.
It was so hard. I just, you know what? It's just, again, this has been a long day. I think I probably didn't have such a great sleep. I will make up for it by showing you some pretty spectacular fights. If I can find the clip of it, it'll be of a, maybe not this Arkham Knight Catwoman team, but of an Arkham Knight Catwoman team handling the main danger that this team faces. When the damage over time is this strong, it makes a Blackest Night Flash team that much better. And this team, if you use it judiciously, could still handle the Blackest Night Flash team.
Nice. Yeah. So there we go. So to start, we've got a couple comments here that we're going to sort of talk a little bit about the comments, but it's more about the replies. And if you're like me, you might have already seen this. I've seen in like one or two places online people posting about the auto-replies.
Only on ours. Like there used to be, so auto-replies used to be like one or two words, right? Like, like yay or congrats or welcome back. Like it seemed more appropriate in responding to the content.
They were like really sort of short whatever kind of nothings. And so this first one, the comment comes from Master 2926, and they say, I wish I backed up my files, all those glitches and grind gone. Our actual response to this would be like, man, that sucks, right?
If we were going to respond to it.
There's not necessarily something for us to say, right?
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things that's just, it is unfortunate, right? But there's not much to say other than, man, sorry about that, right? But the auto replies, do you want to read them or should I?
I want to read them. It's okay. One option that I could pick by just clicking on the button is, you'll probably be asking about those again next week, though.
And then ellipses, 3 dots.
Or, you're still here?
Yeah.
And it's ridiculously confrontational in a way that doesn't actually address the content.
Yeah, it feels like specifically condescending, which is strange, right? It's an odd tone because these are like audience interaction tools.
Yeah.
And I cannot imagine these responses ever being something that you would want to automatically do. I think those are things, I'm not saying that these are things that you should never say to a commenter. I think there's plenty of comments that these would be appropriate responses to.
Right.
Depending on how they're talking to you.
Right.
But,
this ain't it.
Well, if you're trying to manage and create a positive community, which is not always what you're trying to do when you reply to comments, but it feels like if YouTube is implementing a way of automatically replying, that would be sort of what their goal would be ostensibly, right?
Yeah.
Because they're usually much more sort of brand friendly, much more like, oh, well, it's about, nurturing your community and building your brand and whatever. These feel terrible for that.
Yeah.
And then the second comment that we had auto reply to, this was John MM2YL. And they say, I recently broke my Android, so I had to switch to a family member's iPhone. I forgot I had made an iOS account in high school when I had an iPad. I had also done the buying multiple pack glitch, so I'm not too behind.
Yeah. All right. So, and the two options that were, so this is when they get really long. So, I mean, we keep on calling them AI, but what they are language predictive models, right?
Large language models.
Large language models.
All
right. So whatever. Yeah. So they're guessing at the
LLMs.
next word based on a large database of examples where I guess people have used these words.
Yeah. They're token prediction machines. What they do is they tokenize input text, and that's like abstracting it in some sort of way. Yeah. Usually it's like numbers for some grouping of text, like a word or like punctuation or something like that. You feed all of those tokenized things into a model, and it's essentially like autocorrect on your phone, where over and over again, it's returning the next most likely token and constructing something based off of that.
Right. So remember, the comment from John was originally, my Android stopped working, had to go use iPhone. I forgot I had an account already, and so I wasn't that far behind.
Yeah.
All right, so the comments we could pick from where you should be able to merge them. Just try to log into both and let the game handle the merge, which is nonsensical and ridiculous. Actual knowledge is iOS and Android are completely different servers. So even though you might have the same login credentials, none of the information switches over.
Yeah.
And the other option was, that's a very specific scenario that we haven't addressed before, but I'm not sure if it's really account building strategy.
In quotes. Yeah.
So when you quote account building strategy, I mean, it wasn't even part of the comment.
Yeah. What's weird is that the tone of these feel very odd, but some of the ways that this is phrased here, I can't tell if it's pulling from similar like content, like this is like replies on gaming channels, or if it's using some sort of our tags or something, or if there's some amount of this that is pulled from our responses specifically, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know where it's sort of building this from, because I'm sure you could find out a little bit more, but to us, because we're just sort of seeing this and not really paying attention, it feels like it's, a total black box where we don't understand anything about it, right?
Yeah, and the output is ridiculous. There used to be stuff that could be useful, like say, hey, welcome, I've watched you a long time, hey, welcome back.
Yeah. And now it's like, you can click this button
blah,
for
blah, blah, blah,
misinformation or like talking past each other. Yeah. It's like, have you seen those edits where they take clips from Friends and they remove the laugh track?
Oh, no.
So one of the really interesting things about the way the laugh track works in Friends that becomes really painfully obvious when you actually watch it without the laugh track is that the laugh track is an important social marker of the show. People say something, and then it's a joke, it's a punchline, and then the laugh track happens. And so when you watch it without the laugh track, one, the pacing is horrible. Like, people talk,
comedians
and
pause,
then they just
right?
sit there. Yeah,
no, because comedians do that. They wait a beat to give people a chance to react, so they're not laughing over them.
And the second thing is when you remove the laugh track, these people all seem like the world's worst friends because they're saying things and nobody's responding to them. That laugh from the audience is the social response to what that person is saying. And if you listen to it without the laugh track, it's people saying stuff, like the other person staring at them for 5 seconds and then saying something sort of half relevant to what they've said and really not even like talking to them at all. So it's just a bunch of people talking past each other and ignoring what they say and sitting there in silence after like every like couple sentences. And so it feels really like almost uncomfortable because they feel like
this.
Yeah, exactly.
Like these responses.
So that's what I'm saying. This feels like that, where we're talking past you. The response is weird and off, and it would make us seem like really sort of bad. I don't want to say bad necessarily, but it would make us seem like we're not listening to you and when we're communicating with you. It would make it seem like we're just sort of key smashing,
Yeah.
And to be fair, we'd just be clicking buttons, so we really, on a real level, we wouldn't be listening to. I think.
So that would be the equivalent of button smashing when we're playing the game.
Yeah. So even if you didn't know that this was an AI comment, I think you'd feel a certain lack of like real connection or response or understanding there. So even if it tricked you, it would trick you into sort of thinking that we were disengaged and checked out, which we would be if we were using them.
Yeah, we're not yet. I'm not saying that we can't be eventually. We're just not there yet.
Yeah, broadly speaking, I'm sort of... I think that large language models and AI are interesting, right? I think that my issues with them, and I have a lot of issues with them, is a lot of the branding and how people are trying to market it and people using it for stuff that is not supposed to, right? So it's, tech people saying this is this magical future thing and it's going to do X, Y, and Z and all that stuff. So I think like the thing in front of us, in the same way that like, I don't think cryptocurrency is a horrible thing by itself. I think it's an interesting idea as a proof of concept for like a handful of like finance tech nerds, right? Mm-hmm. And if they were just passing it around as like sort of they're like Esperanto, right? Like a synthetic language. I don't think anybody's hurting anybody with Esperanto, but nobody's saying Esperanto is the language of the future. And if you don't learn Esperanto, we're gonna like kick you out of our country or something, right? Like there's there's nobody who's trying to pitch you Esperanto as like the only language anyone's going to be speaking in a decade, and that if you don't learn it, you're going to be like locked out of all like future like conversations, right? Yeah. So I think the issue isn't the way that we handle it. So, and I think how it's being implemented here to me feels like one of those things that feels unnecessary, because I think one of the issues that you run into is the resource cost, right? In terms of the like literal electricity and the R&D and all the time and money and man hours going into stuff. And I think replying to YouTube comments is such a low stakes thing that like we don't need figured out better, and we don't need to be burning resources on you know, auto replies to YouTube comments.
I was totally on board with you until you said the part about low stakes. And I agree that it's low stakes, but that makes me think maybe that's exactly why they're doing it.
Yeah.
Because it is low stakes, they get to see it in action. They get to have feedback for free, basically, right? People are ready to be outraged when they're already commenting on things.
Well, that's why it's happening here. But I'm saying because it's low stakes, people don't really care. It's not like, you know, you're doing this and you're replacing like all of your customer support, right? That's clearly worse. But it's because it's low stakes, it's not worth it, you know? It's not worth it to burn all that resources and have this cycle to sort of like improve an LLM. If you're doing it as a stepping stone to use it for something more important, you know, maybe there's slightly more of an argument there, but it really is just, it feels like it's a waste, right? It's like the equivalent of just like shoveling like energy into sort of a fire. And maybe one day in the future, because that's always the pitch, right? Is that it's going to get better, right? If it's bad now, it's going to get better. So the pitch is that one day, all this sort of electricity and resources, and they're literally like, there's like fresh water that's being like boiled off, like in the use of like LLMs, right? So we're losing fresh water for it. And the pitch is that one day it's going to be good. And then sort of the lack of value that it provides now is going to, the value that it actually is research for future value. But based off of what I'm seeing now, I don't see a pitch for why this is worth it.
I mean, that is an easy argument though, right? Because in general, even if it's not the same thing, it follows that other trend that we see a lot when something new comes along, that it doesn't offer a lot of value to other people for different reasons. Most of the time because it's too expensive. And then when people adopt it and it gets refined over time, then eventually you get something good.
Yeah. I mean, I think my most nuanced version of this is just a worse version of what already exists in a Tom Scott video about AI and sort of the S-curve of emerging technologies. I think that's definitely worth a watch if people haven't seen it. But anyways, we're not here to just talk about AI the whole time. Mostly this was supposed to just be these responses are silly.
Yeah, it's interesting though. So did we address, because they weren't really questions, were they?
No. Neither of them were questions. Yeah, I think we did sort of reply to them.
Yep.
As much as I feel like we need to. Okay, so our next question comes from Estra da Mauricio.
I think that's Estrada
Mauricio. That makes more sense. 2668, and they say, what's the best Blackest Night? Because of the Hawk Girl Challenge, I now have all of the cards and want to know which ones are the best to use.
We actually addressed that, I think, even. I mean, we saved questions from a long time ago, and we've just been accumulating things and going through them in sort of a particular, or usually the freshest one first, but this might have been an old question. And we've talked about it most recently when there was a Blackest Night character in, was it the Challenger or multiplayer? Maybe it was multiplayer with Superman. So Superman is the fourth best. Absolute best to me is still Blackest Night Flash. He would be good with just that reversing damage over time where he gets health and gets energy. But what makes him really good is that ability to interrupt basic attacks in the middle of a combo. And so it's not just a defensive thing, but there's that offensive potential where when the opponent's frozen, you get to land whatever you want unblocked. Special, basic combo, whatever, however you geared them to be the most effective, that you can do whatever. Hawkgirl, because you're effectively getting a second flash, right? She revives him. And the third part of his passive means that instead of getting just, how much is that? I can't even remember. 40% of his health? Something smaller. He gets all of his health. Or maybe it's 2/3. I can't remember. It practically doesn't matter because the way we play him is that you're getting all the health, right?
Yeah.
And then out of all the other Blackest Night characters, I think the one that offers the most sort of group improvement is Blackest Night. Or sorry, in my mind, so this is where I'm having trouble because I'm getting tired. I'm associating words with the first letters.
Yeah.
So Batman. I was thinking Batman. And I said Blackest Night instead. So Batman offers unblockable chance. So he improves Flash. He improves Hawkgirl. He's pretty good himself for being unblockable. I don't think any other Blackest Night teams offer enough to the team as a whole to make up for their deficiencies in improving the team. Don't make up for whatever abilities they have on their own. So that's Superman, Martian Manhunter. To me, that's your sort of top three. There was a fourth one, right? Isn't there? Or sorry, 6 Blackest Night. I can't remember now off the top of my head. It doesn't matter. Those three are the top Blackest Night characters.
Yeah, we're playing real fast and loose tonight. We're a little tired. I had to take a little nap earlier.
Oh my god, I'm so jealous.
Yeah. So is that our final word on that, you'd say?
I mean, if in another 10 minutes I can remember who the other Blackest Night character is,
that's fair.
And why they're not so good to add on this team.
Okay.
But I don't think it matters.
Okay, so I'll give you a minute to think about that. If you don't remember, that's fine. But we're late in the episode because normally we do it right at the start. I don't believe I've talked about this yet. I just read a book that you recommended me.
Ooh.
Jade City.
Yeah.
I've talked about it with people because I've liked the book a lot and I've let people know that it's really good.
Yeah.
But I have not talked about that with you, the listening public. Where I've been recently sort of looking to get a little bit more back into reading just because I think I've been depriving myself a little bit of it. There was a certain amount of the will to read that was burned out of me by school.
Yeah. And
then I think I let myself get out of the habit of reading, and it just wasn't for no real good reason. So I was like, do you have any good recommendations? Is there anything you think that I should pick up? And
so that's hard too. So my bias is because I'm pretty old. The books that have the biggest impact on me tend to be books I read when I was younger.
Yeah.
Which by default means they're pretty old books.
Because they get to be like the best book of that type you've ever read.
Yeah. So I'm trying, and because we've talked about reading a lot, and maybe not here, but in general in real life.
A decent amount here.
Yeah, well, I guess so. Most of the books, though, that I've really love, I've already recommended. So the Greenbone Saga, which is made up of Jade City, Jade War, Jade Legacy, and if we're going to be loose and fast with things like we are tonight, then it also includes the novella Jade Setter of Janloon and the short story collection Jade Shards, and they are so damn good.
They're super readable. They're really interesting. They have the right sort of balance of like what feels like a quite grounded magic system, but also one where they're not sort of sitting you aside and giving you like sort of a lecture or a lesson on exactly how it works, right?
Yeah.
You kind of have to build your understanding from context in what feels like a very organic way. The characters are believable. The writing is really sharp. It does like political intrigue and sort of like layered meanings and like sort of hidden intentions and political like maneuvering in what feels like a very sharp and incisive way.
Well, it gives people, it's what George R.R. Martin does so well in the Song of Ice and Fire series, which is giving multiple perspectives and making all of them valid.
Yeah.
Right? Where they're believable, you can empathize with them, you can understand them in a way because of it's created believably, but also because of the way Fonda Lee writes the characters. Mm-hmm. So the other part, though, see, this is it plays in a lot of stuff, and I feel like I want to say so much all at once to get the ideas across, but I can't do it properly. Yeah. I'm going to jumble it. But here's the thing: it is one of the first Asian-inspired urban fantasies that I've ever read, and it might not seem like a big deal, but I mean, I think I've said this before, maybe in real life and not in this context, but the representation matters in a way. I understood it intellectually. I didn't understand it at a gut level until I read this. And so, you know, when people complain that, you know, hey, why does it matter? Why does representation matters? And it's usually
it's all just stories.
Yeah, it's just usually white people saying it. Not always, but usually. And sometimes it might have been me saying it because I just didn't know what it was. Because back in the day, I shouldn't say the only representation, because there's probably stuff that I didn't have access to or I didn't see.
Yeah.
But all the easily accessed representation in science fiction fantasy, which is where I like to read, was either non-existent, or as appropriation. And it doesn't mean that it's bad, right? Like at the time, I mean, there's a connotation with appropriation because of the way it silences other voices. That is bad.
Yeah.
But back in the day, there wasn't any other option. So when you had...
Sometimes exposure. Sometimes you need bad representation
Yes.
To introduce
Yes.
people to the idea of having representation at all. And then it's a necessary stepping stone, which, and the whole point of it is that it's almost good that in retrospect it feels like gross and clunky and whatever.
And you don't even need that. Sometimes you can have good representation and have it be appropriation. Like, it doesn't always have to be the right people who are doing it. So the examples I'm thinking of are Bridge of Birds by Barry Hewart, which is the first book. It won the World Fantasy Award, but it was like a first book in a series that was originally, I guess, intended for longer, but then he gave up after 3 books. It was Masterly and Number 10 Ox.
Yeah.
And so that Barry Hewart, white guy, writing about Asian stuff, it was good.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't, it was appropriation.
Yeah. It probably, wasn't quite the right person to tell an Asian story.
And the other sort of Asian-inspired science fiction that I read that was also really good, was written by Maureen McHugh. It was China Mountain. I don't know how to pronounce it. Zhang, because that's Mandarin, right? Is it? Maybe. Chung?
Maybe.
Yeah. So, anyways, there were examples. But to actually...
And I also honestly don't know. I think to some extent, some of those might be more appreciation than appropriation, but there's still, even if they're really good, there's a limit on sort of how deep in the understanding of that character you can be without that sort of lived experience.
Yeah. So it hit like the Greenbone saga. Wow.
Yeah.
I thought so the idea though that when you want somebody, when you're looking for diversity, the criticism always is, well, you don't really deserve it. And I think what it misses the point
is... Or you don't need it. Who cares?
Yeah.
Why are you making a big deal about it?
No, and we've already sort of addressed that. But in terms of the idea that it doesn't... It values it too highly, I think it misses the point because it only matters if it's done well.
Yeah.
I don't really care if I read something written by an Asian author that has Asian ideas.
Yeah.
If it's no good, you're not going to hear me talk about it. I don't care. But what matters is that there is room for this kind of writing with these kind of voices that just didn't exist before.
Yeah.
And again, I should qualify, I always qualify that by my limited experience reading. I mean, I read a decent amount. I probably read more than the average person, but I don't read a lot.
There's been some pretty good Asian representation recently. Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? Ki Hee Kwan,
right,
and his character in that was really great. A piece of representation that I really appreciated was in the game Disco Elysium. I really liked it's Harry's partner, Kim Kitsuragi. I found his representation to be really, really cool. And it wasn't huge because one of the other things is that he's in air quotes Asian because it's like a fake world, right? Where there's clearly like Europeans and whatever.
Well, so that's like Green Mosaic. Yeah. It's not really Asia. There's no, it isn't Asia.
Yeah. And then another thing, this is an example of somebody who I would say was doing appreciation as opposed to appropriation. River Under Stars by Guy Gavriel Kay, right? That was a clearly Asian-inspired setting and story.
Right.
But it was so rooted in history and the time period. And so it was both not trying to make any statements about sort of Asian people or Asian history. It's separated enough, but there is sort of a real historical backing that it felt like sort of a historian and somebody who's passionate about like weaving elements of history, and where I don't call that appropriation. I call that like finding an interesting setting and really trying to do it justice.
I don't know the terms well enough to really be able to say if this is possible. If you separate the appropriation from the negative connotation, right?
Yeah.
The idea that you are an outsider looking in and using these elements to your own ends.
Yeah, I feel like that's more cultural borrowing or exchange. I think appropriation always has that negative connotation.
Does it? Okay, so then I think that the examples that we've given, so maybe that I'm using the word too broadly, loosely, and too strongly in the wrong way, then that these are good examples of if you're going to be doing something like that, then you better be really darn careful about how you do it and do a good job.
Yeah. It's like that girl who wore that Chinese dress to her prom.
Right.
Right? And, there's a lot of Chinese people saying, well, it's not like this is this isn't a religious dress or a cultural dress or whatever, right? And she's not making her prom dress. She's not wearing a prom dress to mock Chinese people.
Right.
She's wearing a prom dress because she thinks she looks pretty in it, right? So she actually likes it,
I like
right?
that. So the difference would be if she were wearing it out on Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there is that line where, like, if you're trying to tell a story and you think it's richer in this world and you're not, I think there's also stories that I think to some extent do feel like you're more speaking for a group of people or that they're in some way supposed to be representative, right?
Right.
And I think you can run into that issue with, like, queer, like, coming out stories and stuff like that, where that feels very personal, and the emotional veracity of it, like, it being emotionally true is so important, and you really do have, difficulties doing that. And then there's sort of stories where if you're just trying to weave in information and history and context like that, I think it's a lot easier to sort of do that than it is to be like, this is what it feels like to be gay, if you're, like, not, right?
So, and as you say that, though, I think what's beautiful about the Greenbone Saga that Fonda Lee wrote is that because it's inspired and it's not actually trying to be, it's not being as obviously Asian in the way that, you can map, this is going to be China, this is going to be Taiwan, this is going to be Japan, and whatever, that somebody white could have actually written that. Yeah. And it would have been
acceptable.
Really, it would have been really good if they'd done that. It's when people try to do things like that are very specifically, this is Asia, this is China, this is, you know what I mean? That it's weird though that she was the one that ended up doing it.
There's a joke about George Lucas's characters in Star Wars, which is that he'll invent a race that feels like it's a racist caricature or like a stereotype of some race.
Oh, Jar Jar Binks.
But it's far enough away from any specific race that if you say, oh, well, he's clearly, this is clearly meant to be, insert race here, it says more about you. Like, you can't sort of call it out as being like, oh, well, this is a stereotype for X without making you're the racist in that context. Because he's like, it's a weird fantasy, right? Like, J.K. Rowling, when you look at her stereotype of like, her goblins, right, who run the banks, right? There's very clearly Jewish stereotypes and harmful Jewish stereotypes woven into those. But with George Lucas, it feels almost more mean-spirited for the way that he's constructed some of these races, where it's like, this is a race of like mean liars, but if you see a specific race in them, it's more of like a Rorschach test for like who you're racist against than who he is. Anyways.
Yeah, you're right. It's the separation. The bigger the distance you have from what you're actually talking about, the person who's making, like, if you have to see something in that, then the viewer has to be bringing it there.
So I thought that was funny because I saw a couple examples of that, and it feels very true to me, where like, if you say, oh, well, this really horrible, like, gross race of people who lie all the time and are constantly stealing is clearly, a stereotype for insert group here that says so much more about you than it does about George Lucas, but also he did write what really seems like a racist caricature of some group, but it's hard to know what or if it was meant to be that way. Anyways, I think that's an interesting point to end it on. To finish up, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon. That is Michael Devries, Irvin, Ruiz, Hoshi 127, and Nora Klimek, who are supporting us on the credited level, as well as all of you for hanging out, watching us, supporting us however you do. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.